I think that's exactly right. And then I think that tells us how we can make use of it for, let's say, the workplace. So it's fun to chat with it just about topics, as if it's a living Wikipedia, or to have it write poetry and so on. But in the workplace, it's difficult to get search engines to give you a synthesis of relevant information in response to one query. It gives you a lot of pages, and then you have to do a lot of work. But what this thing can do is you prime it with, as you said, a context. And you want to take, this is the same thing with Midjourney and the images. You want to give it archetypes. You want to give it what in your own mind is a synthesis of context and say, okay, instead of, for example, woman with child, you would say mother with newborn. Those are archetypes. And if you wanted, you could, add additional aspects to the archetype. For example, woman, child, and a father is more specific than woman, child, and a man. And then from father, you could say businessman, or you could say executive. These archetypes will bring with them additional context and detail. Same thing for prompting for work, basically, which is, okay, give it as the key points, the bullet points, the highlights of the context or the topic that you want to ask about. In fact, go ahead and ask it to tell you bullet points and synthesize the topic you want to talk about. It will then have that in its context. And now you can ask the question about the thing that you really want to know. Hey, how would I do this differently? What are some other ways I can solve that? By it having that context that you made it dredge up in its memory when you ask it the question, then it will actually pull together connections into spaces that might not be familiar to you, but have a much greater chance of being, let's say, correct and not hallucinated as an answer. I've talked about how we're using it, but I'm really curious in a firm like yours, which is all about applying synthesized information to customer problems to solve it for them. Have you guys been able to take advantage of this?
So it's a good question. Our policy with regards to using generative technologies is somewhat limited today, primarily driven by intellectual property right concerns and considerations. So our current policy states that we're not allowed to use generative AI, not even Copilot, for code that we write for our clients for those very reasons. We are allowed to use generative AI for internal purposes. So we can use it for writing code that is intended for use within BCG and to test code that is used within BCG and for internal documents. And to that extent, it is being used extensively. I think the questions regarding the safety of these algorithms and the intellectual property concerns that are associated with it still need to be overcome and still need to mature a little before it becomes something that can be mainstream adopted in the context of service providers like ourselves.